Afro Tales podcast is a part of the Connected Podcast Network.
Ahoy, my friends. Welcome aboard the Afro Tales podcast. I'm your storyteller, Malinda. Join me as we explore the tales that grew from the people of indigenous and African descent in the Americas and the Caribbean.
After, come and see me, chef, who will impart upon you a recipe for the story you have just heard.
So with no further ado, let us set sail on this new age of exploration.
Devil in the church. Of all the places you might expect to meet up with the devil, you never figure to see him in church. Now do you? But the devil have a lot of experience, and he say you got to fight fire with fire, water with water, and wind with wind. He don't have to hang around places like Sodom and Gomorrah, cause he ain't needed there. Folks in those places already doing his bad work for him. Another thing, the devil can't always go around looking like the devil. If he did that, he ain't going to get nowhere. He got to pass himself off like ordinary people. Sometimes he even got to pray and shout like he been saved. Now there ain't nothing more against the devil's nature than that, is there? I'll tell you what I mean. Well, one day, the devil looked around and said, "Sure is quiet around here. Ain't nothing bad happening today. Guess I'll go and make some trouble." So he picked out one small, half-sized devil and tell him, "Boy, you go on up there and corrupt some folks today. Make them mean and sinful. Get going now." This little devil, he got dressed up, tucked his tail in good, and went up to find some folks to make them sinful. He got to town just about church time on Sunday. When he saw all the folks going into the church, he said, "Look like to me, I got to go in there after those people." So he went into church, sat down in the back row, waiting till the service was over. Preacher preached, people moaned and shouted, and the little devil just sat and waited. When service was over, the little devil got busy running around trying to corrupt folks, telling them to do bad things. But they didn't pay him no mind, saying, "Don't believe I've ever seen you around here before, brother." Well, the little devil got mighty discouraged after a while and went home. "You corrupt a lot of good folks up there?" the big devil asked him. The little devil says. "Well," the big devil said, kind of mad, "what you spend all your time at?" I went up just like you told me," the little devil said. "All the folks were going to church, so I went in and sat in the back row till they got through, and then wouldn't no one talk to me after that?" The big devil, he just shook his head, looking kind of sad at the little devil, like he was pretty stupid. "Man," he said, "don't you know that if you going to get along, you got to fight fire with fire, water with water, iron with iron, and air with air? You got to go do what the other folks do. If you're going to go to church to do your work, you can't sit in the back row. You got to get up to the mourner's bench and shout and moan and groan with the rest of them. If you done that, wouldn't nobody have said they had never seen you before? If you're playing baseball with the folks, you gotta hit a home run to win their respect. If you're doing it with music, you gotta make them dance. And if you're doing it in a church, you really got to get sanctified. Man, you sure got a lot to learn. The end.
Story number 2.
Preacher and the Devil. If you're going to stand there and allow, as you say, a bear sitting on Uncle Jim's porch reading a newspaper, that calls for some close examination. Could be you got yourself influenced into thinking you saw it. Could be there was a real bear there too, but 'tain't likely. I seen plenty of bears in my time, and ain't none of them learned their letters. The way people are, they always trying to see something that other folks ain't seen. And that's a powerful influence on the imagination. And if they gets a little boost from the devil, ain't no telling what they going to come up with. Like the time the devil was moseying and trying to figure out some devilment to do. He done so many devilments in his time, he don't hardly think of new ones. Then he see the preacher coming along the road and he say to himself, "Man, I got a good one to do on the preacher. I'm going to get him to tell about the biggest lie folks around here ever heard." So he tucked his tail inside his clothes good and act mighty sweet. When the preacher come along, he say, "Morning, Reverend. Mighty fine morning." "Yeah, brother, it sure is," preacher say. "You a stranger around here?" "Just passing through," devil say. "Reckon I'll be around till Monday or Tuesday." "Well, ain't that nice," preacher say. "You'll be right welcome at the church tomorrow." "That's sure nice of you," devil say. "What you going to preach on?" "Brother," preacher say, "David and Goliath. It's my text for tomorrow." "That sounds fine to me," devil say. "How big you expect that Goliath was?" "Well, brother, he was sure bigger than you and me. I reckon he might have stood about 9 feet tall." Devil shook his head. "Well, that's a disappointment to me. You know, things was a lot bigger in them old days. Everything was different. Take Methuselah. Now, didn't he live 900 years? If you say a man around here lived 100 years, that's pretty old. But if you talking about Methuselah, 100 years ain't nothing. If you telling folks that Goliath was only 9 feet tall, they ain't going to be interested. If you want to get the congregation of yours rocking and reeling, you got to make things real big, you know what I mean?" Devil, he went on talking this way. Preacher listening and taking it all in. "I tell you what," preacher say, "you going to be there tomorrow? You just sit in the front row and give me the nod if you think something got to be a little bigger. Bob your head up and down and I'll be much obliged." "Fine," devil say. "I'll sit right in the front row." Next morning was Sunday, and when the preacher get up there to preach, he see this stranger sitting right in the front row showing all his teeth. Preacher open his Bible, slap his hand on the table and begin. "This morning, we're going to talk about David the shepherd boy. preacher say. Right from the first book of Samuel, this boy, David, was a son of Jesse. And he was pretty sharp. And the Philistines was coming down on the Israelites. And they had a champion fighter amongst them named Goliath. Now, according to the good book, the Philistines sent their champion out to the field to challenge the stoutest man amongst the Israelites to fight. And he stood up there in the middle of the field, and wasn't no Israelite wanted to fight him, because Goliath was 6 cubits tall. And that makes him 9 feet head to toe. Preacher looked down in the first row to see what this stranger thinks. And he see the devil bobbing his head up and down. So the preacher think he can do a little better by Goliath and say, come to think of it, that 9 feet was before he was altogether full grown. He was 8 cubits tall, and that makes him 12 feet top to bottom. Preacher sees the devil still bobbing his head. But that was before he stretched himself out to his full height. Preacher tells the congregation, you might say he was closer to 15 and 20 feet altogether. Fact is, I'm pretty sure he was about as high as the steeple on a Presbyterian church. And that was only when he was a little bit hunched down. The devil stopped bobbing his head and showed his teeth, so preacher relaxed a bit. Yes, brothers and sisters. And this man had a spear that weighed more than 50 pounds. And the shaft was 60 feet long. Preacher looked down and see the devil pushing out his lips and shaking his head up and down like he was mighty put out. So the preacher said, but looking at it, that spear weighed around 400 pounds and was as big around the shaft as the old elm tree in the front. Well, then David the shepherd boy come out across the field with his slingshot and picked up a stone about as big as a buckshot. Preacher see the devil bobbing his head like it was about to fall off. Well then, about as big as a watermelon, he say. Devil's head was still bobbing. Come to think of it, that stone was about as big as a bale of cotton, and if you figure that's the size of it and made the stone all the way through, it must have weighed more than 1,000 pounds. And David, the shepherd boy, only about 5 feet 4 tall, or maybe only 4'5". Or I guess you could say he was only about half that size. Hit Goliath in the head with that stone from his slingshot and killed him dead. And when Goliath fell, he was so tall he stretched on the ground from Shaka to Azekah. Preacher looked sideways to see the devil bobbing his head, something awful, and he said, Old Goliath stretched, you might say, from Shaka to Jerusalem. Devil sat there still bobbing away. You might say Goliath stretched all the way from Shaka to Mobile. Preacher say, and if we don't adjourn this meeting right now, we're going to have him laying right on top of us. The end. Wow. You have to have fun with church stories, right? With preacher's tales. They remind me of growing up in the church and listening to the pastors tell these tales from the Bible, tell their Bible stories. Goliath, when I was a kid, was taller than Paul Bunyan, or at least as tall. He was huge. And David was a small kid fighting against this man that is towering over, the skyscraper, the Eiffel Tower, as a prime example. That's how big I thought he was back then. Now, 8-9 foot tall man coming to fight. Yeah, that's probably more like it. Even 7-footer, fighting somebody that was maybe 4.5, 5 feet. I love it. This book is a treasury of Afro-American folklore, the oral literature, traditions, recollections, legends, tales, songs, religious beliefs, customs, sayings, and humor of peoples of African-American descent by Harold Courlander. And this book has wonderful stories in it. Wonderful information about different cultures, different religions. If you do not have this book, or if you've never read this book, please go get this book. It is wonderful, right? It is absolutely wonderful. Preacher Tales is what I call stories like I read for you today. Preacher Tales. They are wonderful. And if I offend any denomination with the way I do it, understand I grew up in the church, and my voices that I use for the pastors or the preachers are based on those pastors and preachers that I experienced growing up. The Creflo Dollars, the Pastor Waldrip and Brother Bowen, ones I knew personally, and many others that I grew up either watching on TV or whose services I went to myself growing up in the church. And I've done Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalian, Kojic. I've ran the gamut on churches and denominations that I have been to, right? So that is where that comes from. It's an amalgamation of those men and women who I've heard preach to me, all right? So no disrespect intended. Bible stories are allegories, much like folk tales and folklore. So just remember that. I don't have much to say about this. I loved the preacher and what he did. I love the devil's, not saying I love the devil, but I love the devil character and what they tried to do. It was amazing. And if you know black churches, if you try to do anything to get them to sin even a little bit after that church service, you might as well kiss that goodbye, because they got the whole armor of God. The whole armor of God on them at that point. And nothing you can do, devil, to get them to trespass on their Lord and Savior. Anyway, go see Chef. He has a wonderful recipe for you after this. And as always, thank you for coming along this journey. Until next time, have a blessed day.
Welcome, my friends, to the Galley. I am your chef, and today we have a wonderful recipe inspired by the story you have just heard. Today, we will be creating sweet potato pie. It is not my mother's recipe. But, what do we need for this wonderful recipe? 3 frozen, unbaked, 8 or 9 inch single crust pie shells. 4 pounds uncooked and unpeeled sweet potatoes. Half a cup or 1 stick of butter. Half a cup pure, finely granulated sugar. Half a cup of light brown sugar popped. 3 large eggs. 2 cups whole milk. 1 tablespoon vanilla extract. And half a teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Now, how do we put this together? Easy. hand wash your sweet potatoes. After a complete washing, boil the sweet potatoes until they are tender. Once potatoes are tender, drain and allow them to cool before peeling and mashing. Blend your sweet potatoes in mixing bowl with a blender to remove strings. While you are cooking the sweet potatoes, go ahead and place your butter on the kitchen countertop and allow to soften. After the potatoes are ready, go ahead and preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, cream the softened butter with both sugars. Mix in the blended sweet potatoes and continue to mix while adding the eggs, one at a time. Finally, add your milk, vanilla extract, nutmeg, and salt and mix thoroughly. Finally, pour mixture evenly into your 3 frozen unbaked pie shells. Bake for 1 hour and 30 minutes on 350 degrees on the center rack. And that is it, my friends. Now, go. Make this recipe yours. And until I have another wonderful recipe for you, remember, do not allow the devil to have his way with you, especially in church. And until next time, my friends, as always, enjoy.
Thank you, my friends, for coming on this voyage. Thanks to Art by Chalet for the logo, episode, and shirt designs. You can get t-shirts and other items on tpublic.com. You can contact me on all socials at AfroTalesCast. That's AfroTales Cast. And email me at AfroTalesCast@gmail.com. You may also become a benefactor by simply sharing with any and everyone, giving a thumbs up, a 5-star rating and review in your podcast app of choice, or simply donating on Patreon or Ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. So until we meet again, may your winds be fair and your seas follow.